So let's start with the big picture and the big main question. How do you assess the immediate and medium or probably long-term economic impact of this Trump's reciprocal tariff on the world's economy?
Certainly, I think this was one of those, developments that we had an indication back in February that this is going to happen. We've spent a lot of time, and I'm sure many of the countries as well, trying to figure out, how do we prevent reciprocal tariffs. So you had some countries actually reach out to the U.S. trying to understand if they can get any, common ground and the tariffs won't be imposed. But fast forward, we have seen now that in early April, not only reciprocal tariffs were imposed, but the scale of the tariff rates are extremely high. And if you take just the ASEAN region as an example, you've seen quite a bit of variation. On one end of the spectrum, you have countries like Vietnam, which are more than 40%. And then you've got Singapore on the other side, which is at about 10%. So quite a varied, in terms of tariff rates being imposed. Coming back to your question on medium to long term, I think it's important to understand the U.S. point of view. And the U.S. point of view for these tariffs, the way they justify it is to say that, U.S. has run trade deficits, almost $1 trillion.
Right.
Quite a while, and hence they want to correct that. I think that's why they are reaching out. So we do think it's negative for U.S. outlook. Inflation likely to go up, growth likely to go down, and certainly will impact the Asia as a region as well.
Not only in the U.S., but also in the economy. How do you see it?
No, certainly. For the U.S., it means higher inflation. And if you see many of the survey indicators, U.S. numbers that are coming out, it's already showing in the numbers. Sentiments initially, but, we do think it's a matter of time before inflation, the formal gauge also picks up. And growth sentiment-wise has been weakening. So that's going to be what we call a stagflationary risk for the economy, right? So a central bank finds it very difficult to address that kind of a conundrum. To Asia and Indonesia in particular, certainly the impact will vary across different countries. But at this time, I think most of the governments are trying to see if there are any a regional response can be put forward to the U.S. To gain some common ground and to gain some concessions.
For countries like Indonesia that are not directly targeted, what's at stake and what needs to be responded as from the governmental side?
At the onset, I want to mention that we're quite surprised by the scale of the reciprocal tariff that was imposed on Indonesia. If you see the scale of Indonesia's trade balance, which is basically U.S. runs a deficit with Indonesia, it's not that big. And Indonesia's exports to the U.S. amount to about 2% of GDP. Again, from Indonesia's point of view, it's not that big. Given these kind of, so the 15 trading partners, we were quite surprised that it's over 30%. I do think when you dig into details, it seems to suggest that it's just not the tariff differential, but it's also non-trade barriers seems to have played a part. So I would think that one of the measures, and the government has already been speaking about it, it is to lower the local content restrictions that were put earlier. So U.S. companies had raised objections about it, and something that the Indonesian government is also talking about, that they could relook at that policy. But I do think that it's generally extremely difficult to turn around these things very, very fast.
Yeah.
So barring U.S. delaying it, I would think that this tariff rates will continue to linger.
I mean, Indonesia has chosen not to retaliate on any decision that Trump has made for Indonesia's tariff. How do you see this decision? Is it deliberate enough?
Certainly, I think that would be, as you are seeing in the case of, how U.S.-China relationship has deteriorated, especially because China also took quite a bit of retaliatory action.
Yeah.
If you see outside of China, most of the Asian countries, ASEAN particularly, have just preferred not to retaliate immediately. They have, they're taking a more conciliatory approach. They're talking about how do we, reach out? How do we need to put a whole ASEAN put together kind of a response? How do we work out this entire tiff with the US? So I would think that is the right way forward, because I think retaliation might carry even more negative repercussions. So certainly from Indonesia's point of view, I think what the government has been initiating would be the right. So we will watch for the next few weeks to see what kind of actions the government is able to undertake to again placate some of the US demands.
I mean, but it certainly escalates really fast, and China seems to be at the center of this trade confrontation with the cumulative tariff of 100.4% starting this April 9. How do you think this new tariffs affect China's economic resilience and global standings, especially for Indonesia with its first partner of trading, that is China?
Certainly, I think Indonesia, China is a very key export market, the biggest share, and also one of the important investors as well, especially if you see some of the sectors like commodity downstreaming. China does have an outsized role in those investments. So to answer your question on China's tariffs, certainly it's been, 104% really is mind-boggling, so to speak. So for Asian countries, including Indonesia, so first line of impact, our own growth analysis has showed that on tariffs alone, we expect about 0.4, 0.5% of GDP. Now, second derivative impact is if US slows down or China growth slows down a lot. Then you would see another 0.2, 0.3% of GDP kind of impact. So certainly slower China spells more worry for this region. But at the onset, I think there doesn't seem to be either US or China willing to take a step back. So these trade tensions look like they're going to fester for a while.
For the current days? Or how do you see it? Or probably it's going to be a long-term one?
Yeah, I think it really depends. See, I mean, the US term, the president's term is for the next 4-5 years. Barring any change in tact, we do see that this could become a bit of a medium-term issue as well. But, there'll be very few businesses who would think, okay, I need to close shop and move to the US because of cost. Cost advantages are very little there. It won't be as efficient. So I would think that they would remain in, ASEAN or Asia in general. But in the very near term, if you're not able to sell to the US as much, most of the countries will look for other markets. Europe, it could be Latin America, could be the other Asian countries like Taiwan, Korea, and look at increasing their market share there. And finally, on Indonesia's point of view, I think some sectors will have more impact, especially these are labor-intensive sectors, what we call the low-tech exports. Those will have to, look for alternatives pretty fast because these are, again, impact could come on growth and could come on employment prospects as well.
Radhika, so what's your outlook for 2025 and beyond? Will this trade conflict define the next global economic chapters for the US, China, or probably the world?
Certainly. I mean, I think one had hoped it doesn't come to this, but unfortunately, you've really seen the two big players in global trade really, at loggerheads, so to speak. So the other countries, I don't think the Asian countries are in a space where they would either pick on China or they don't want to belong to either camp.
Okay.
I think there are advantages of trading with China and advantages of trading with US as well. So they will try and keep a neutral stance, but kind of hedge their bets in terms of growth prospects.
Well, thank you so much for your wonderful insight, Radhika Rao, Senior Economist and Executive Director of DBS Singapore. Thank you for joining us in CNBC Indonesia. A pleasure to have you.